granniopteryx, she knows the truth, she's linking every link.
They just can't see the mote in their own eyes, can they? Tim Davie attacked BBC's enemies for weaponising its mistakes. Now, you make one mistake and, it's a mistake. But this is a whole catalogue of mistakes. And he just can't see that. Suddenly, the BBC has enemies. And hang on, what's it say here? Greg Smith, the shadow Tory minister, said, "It's not weaponising to hold an organisation to account. The BBC need to remember the public are forced to pay for them via the licence fee, whether they watch BBC or not. It's just somebody else's fault." I'm going to return to the Trump thing because I have some things to say about it. And I will start off by saying that Trump didn't act very well after the election. He just couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept he'd lost. It is entirely possible that the Democrats had been cheating. Or even it's sort of possible, there's an argument about that they actually stole the election. But those are the breaks. That's politics. There's no doubt that Trump's refusal to accept the result caused part of that febrile atmosphere. It was disappointing to me as well. But this is what happens in politics. You accept it and then you come back to fight another day. Trump wasn't prepared to do that. Well, in the end, he was. On the other hand, he didn't actually ask for a revolution, and it remains to be seen how and why that march on the 6th of January got started, because I'm quite prepared to believe that there'd been some deep state chicanery in that. OK, that said, I shall now talk about the Panorama programme that's threatening to bring down the whole BBC edifice. And if the reaction of Tim Davie is anything to go by, it will, because there's no bend there. There's a storm blowing over the BBC and they're just standing there saying, we are right and they are wrong, and they're getting at us because they're enemies. They're standing full face to that wind. Instead of saying, we've got to do some serious changes here. That is the only way the BBC will save itself, and I can't see that there's any prospect of that when even people like Tim Davie are still refusing to accept what they've done and how they did it. OK, well, I'm granniopteryx. Please like this video. Please share it. Please subscribe to my channel. YouTube are sort of paring away at the subscriptions. So subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell, because when you do that, you solidify your subscription in some way. Of course, all you guys on the other channels, no problem. They're subscribe if you want to, but they're not going to mess around with your subscription. All right, well, let's get on with talking about this. OK, so I'll start with this. There's absolutely no doubt that the Panorama programme containing the falsified speech on October the 28th, 2024, which was just a few days before the American election, was an attempt by the Panorama team to affect the voting. Certainly it was. The programme went out on BBC in this country, but it also went out on bbc.com to viewers all over the world, including the USA and Australia as well, assuming that the people who work at the BBC and the people who work at The Guardian are pretty much clones of each other. We might remember that, well, quite a while ago, in 2004, The Guardian decided that John Kerry would make a better president than George Bush. Do you remember that? And so The Guardian made a bid to get Kerry elected in Clark County, Ohio. And that, if he had been, that would have given him the numbers to get him to the White House. In the end, it was quite a tight race. But anyway, The Guardian enlisted their readers as volunteers, and they got the lists of voters, and they gave each volunteer 2 or 3 voters they could write to. And these Guardian readers were going to write to these people in America to give their opinion about the 2 candidates. What astonishes me is that those guys at The Guardian actually thought that the good people of Ohio would accept this correspondence and might actually change their votes because of it. Can you imagine? Suffice it to say, I've seen some of the responses to those letters, and you'll be able to find some online as well if you're interested. And my goodness me, for a bunch of ignorant backwoodsmen, you guys in Ohio certainly know how to construct a sentence. Well done you, is what I say. Oh, those guys at The Guardian, but they're just the same as the guys at the BBC. They are stamped from the same die. You realise, of course, that if that show had the effect the programme makers intended, that is, to get Kamala into office, the result would have ended up killing Trump. I mean, it would have killed him, because we know that a Harris administration would spend every resource at its command to imprison Trump, even if it was only for jaywalking. And, well, you know, things happen to people in prisons, both here and in the USA. These revelations about the Panorama programme forced me to think about the heartless immorality of the modern left. I mean, just look at this guy. I'm not saying he's heartless because I don't know, but immoral. He saw what his organisation, the he headed, he saw what they were doing. He knows about BBC Arabic, which was actually pumping out anti-Semitic propaganda. He knew about this programme here. There were other things he knew about, which people were complaining about. There's a group of historians who actually spoke to the BBC, listing all the anti-British nonsense that they were putting out in their programmes basically for school children. And yet they were ignored. That is immoral, to give children the view of Britain that his organisation was giving. And the people in Panorama, when they were editing the speech, they knew that Trump wasn't planning an insurrection. It wasn't as if they were exposing a tyrant with an agenda. They actually had to put words into his mouth which he didn't say, or not in that order. Yeah, they've got all the right words, but not necessarily in the right order. And the skillfulness, I did go through that, the skillfulness of the editing was remarkable. Believe me, I've been doing a lot of editing since I started making these videos, and it's as skilled a job and as time-consuming as needlepoint, and I'm not that good at needlepoint either. You don't just do that in a burst of enthusiasm. You have to plan, you have to check, you have to cut in at the right places. So, for instance, he's not standing here and talking like this, and then the next minute he's like this and talking like that, where you can see that there's a cut. They had to pick the right bits to cut. You don't do that, you know, if you're just being a bit over enthusiastic. So yes, they knew what they were doing. They knew that Trump's loss in that election would in one way or another end his life, and they did it anyway. Now, look, if he'd lost the election on his own account, that would have been something else. But they were trying to force that loss. That's what I'm talking about. There's a sort of spiteful heartlessness in the souls of a whole lot of the modern left, a complete lack of empathy that I find quite... Now, I was going to say disturbing, but it's more than that. I suppose you could say that it fills me with foreboding. It's not just the guys in Panorama, of course, and the Trump thing. It's all those guys making Nazi salutes to elderly Jews here in London. It's mass mobbing and beating up of a lone journalist like Andy No. It's swatting, it's doxing, and it's the deliberate circulation of malicious lies calculated to trigger off the violent responses of the mentally unstable, like that guy who tried to shoot Donald Trump was obviously infected by all sorts of stuff on the internet that were not true about Trump. It's a complete lack of empathy, which might be excusable in a teenager who doesn't know much about the world, but is absolutely terrifying if it persists into adulthood. And the BBC seems to be full of those sort of people. In this particular case, the BBC is sort of, it's like a whole building full of people with some sort of arrested development. You know, OK, anyone who watched the joyous reports of the BBC commentators after the Labour Party swept the board in the UK general election in 2024, did you see those? They were almost pulling party poppers and blowing those things that make noises and unfurl when you blow into them. I mean, you could see the party hats almost. You couldn't fail, but this was a national broadcaster. They were talking to the entire British nation, and they were celebrating the win of just under a third of the will of the voters. And they seemed to see no problem with that. That's what I'm talking about, this total lack of empathy among a whole lot of people on the left. In fact, that might be the defining characteristic of the left right now. Anyway, I'll wrap up here. Except I can't stop this video without making the point about Trump, that he is a remarkably brave man. I've said before, I probably wouldn't want him as a neighbour. I can imagine he'd be overbearing and very clear about what he wants, so whether it was to my advantage or not. But I have to admire the man he is, in the position he is. Many would have buckled under that constant pressure that the Biden government kept going at him all the time. Many would have just retired after that first debacle, kept their heads down, perhaps moved to the Caribbean. Putting himself up for a second term was literally putting himself in the firing line. And if he'd failed, he would have been a target for any Democratic administration that came in. It was such a risk, such a gamble, and he still did it. Whatever you think of Trump, you have to realise that this is a man who is extremely brave and possibly with the bravery of somebody who has a mission. OK, well, yeah. That's what I've got to say about the Panorama programme and the modern left. Nothing like the left who used to be in the left back in the day here in this country. They were people who'd come out the mines, come out of working class families, I think they had the wrong idea, but there was no doubt that they had empathy. Not this lot. Different breed of person altogether. All right, till next time. You can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.